What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Podcast. Today, we have the honor and the privilege to be joined by the former Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Florida, Lopez-Cantera, Carlos Lopez-Cantera, who also happens to be the first Hispanic Lieutenant Governor of the state of Florida, which is a great accomplishment. And I know he serves as a role model not only to us, but to so many other Hispanics throughout the state of Florida, throughout the country, throughout the world. We're so excited to have you on, Carlos. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you are somebody who knows the state very well. You've done a lot of great things for us Floridians that we're going to get into now in a second. But we first want to start with our lightning round of warm-up questions to break the ice a little bit. And I think this first question is really fun because I'm not quite sure who I would choose, but I'm curious to know, you, of course, being in politics for such a long time, what your answer would be. And that the question is, who is your favorite American politician of all time? Could be someone living today or someone who has passed away.
Abraham Lincoln.
Boom.
Abraham Lincoln.
Straight shot. Why Abraham Lincoln?
Well, because of what he accomplished and what he had to go through to accomplish what he accomplished while in office. He took office as the country was literally tearing itself apart. Many states had seceded, made it their goal to secede before he was sworn in. As he was traveling to D.C., there were assassination plots from secession supporters, and then if you just follow the history of everything that he went through to achieve the goal of ending slavery and his will to see it through. I mean, I think it's unprecedented. There are other presidents who've dealt with obviously serious and consequential decisions and moments in history, but I think that Lincoln's place in history is still unique to this day. And you just look at the pictures of him before he took office and after he left, or the last picture before he was assassinated, and you can see the toll that it took on him physically. So he's still my favorite. There's a very close runners up, but he's my favorite.
Yeah. Now, you know what I sometimes think about? I'm curious to know what you think. You know, and you mentioned Abraham Lincoln, which I think we all agree is a great politician that set the tone for this country and was a big part of our success today. You know, just a fun question. Of course, I don't think we'll ever know the answer to this, but in your opinion, do you think if Abraham Lincoln was alive today, he would be proud of where America stands globally right now today? Or what do you think his thoughts would be?
That's a good question. I never thought about it. I mean, if you took the 1860s Lincoln and instantly transformed him to 2023, I think he'd have a heart attack from all the changes and all the technology and everything. There's cars that drive themselves. There's flying contraptions. So I think he'd be overwhelmed by the technology. But I think if he looked at, once he got past all that and he was able to look at our society and how far we've come with inclusion and opportunities, and how capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than in this country than any other government or country in the history of the world, I think he'd be proud of what the United States of America has become. We're not perfect, but we're still better than any other system in the world.
Absolutely, Lieutenant. I think, growing up, I was kind of a history buff, and, I remember reading the books and all the documentaries on Abe Lincoln. And the question that Anthony brought up was kind of an interesting one, right? Because it's like, we always like to think, what would it be like if we put ourselves in, the 1800s or the 1700s or, during the Revelation or whatever it is that we, those types of series of events, but we never think of it the other way around, whereas like, how would those types of people like to live in today's day and age, right? Or how would they react to some of the things that we've been doing in the technology? And we were just on a call yesterday with another guest, and they were talking about that, that Hyundai is looking to start, implementing flying cars in the next 10 years. It's like these crazy innovations that we've been able to accomplish over the past few years. I'm sure that Abe Lincoln would definitely be overwhelmed. Nonetheless, I feel like he would be proud with the success and the accomplishments that we've been able to come so far with. But that was number one.
In one of these. what you would think.
Yep.
We have let's talk to all the history of the human race right in the palm of your hand.
Crazy.
It's insane. Yeah, I can't imagine what he would just, looking at an iPhone, he'd probably just gasp in despair. But I can't imagine. Number 2 of our little lightning round here, and this is an interesting one as well. If you could be any age for a week, what age would you be and why?
Well, why a week? I didn't understand why a week.
I guess just to implement, something temporary. But if you want to make it more interesting, if you could choose to stop aging at a certain age, basically forever, what age would that be? What do you consider was maybe a best age for you? We've gotten all types of different answers for this, so I'm interested to know what you have to say.
Well, I recently bought a shirt that is part humorous and part true, and it says on the front of it, "My favorite childhood memory is when my back didn't hurt." I would say the age would probably be 35 because once you hit 40, things start hurting that never hurt before.
Things you never knew could hurt start hurting, right?
Exactly. But I think 35 would be a good age because you still have enough physical youth, but you are already a little more matured and wise.
It's interesting. That's 35. Yeah. Did you ever play sports in high school, or I did anything like that? What sports did you play?
Track and field and soccer.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Yeah, I know Gabe and I played basketball, and we joke around now, but it's really true. And we're only, like 21, 22, but we go long periods without playing basketball. And the next, when we played basketball without having touched one in like 7 months, the next day, everything hurts, right? So we're already getting like a little glimpse of that, and we're only 21, but everything hurts the next day.
Start working out every day.
Yeah, you got to start playing basketball more often. But
this year,
yeah,
man, when something starts hurting, or if you hurt something, it takes 2 or 3 weeks to heal. You're still at an age where you can heal in a day or two.
Yeah,
at my age and beyond, it takes much longer to heal.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we're gonna have to play basketball when I'm down in Miami, all 3 of us, and see who can last the longest. That'll be a lot of fun. But anyway, let's jump into the meat of the podcast and get to know you a little bit more for those who don't know you. And of course, I mentioned you're the former Lieutenant Governor of Florida, and you've had a lot of other different leadership positions like House of Representatives, Property Appraiser for Miami-Dade County, and then of course, Lieutenant Governor, like I just mentioned. You've had a lot of accomplishments throughout your life. I was reading your bio, your brief bio and your history, and you've done a lot of great things in those different capacities. And even still today, you still do a lot of impactful things and inspiring young leaders like ourselves. What would you say is your accomplishment that you're most proud of up until today? Could be personal or from your career.
Oh, well, if it's all encompassing, it's my family. Once you have kids, you realize that that's what the purpose of life is to reproduce and leave your children better off than you were, and leave them better prepared than you were. So I think if I had to think of one single accomplishment, it'd be being a father. But if it's not about government and my time in public service, when I was Lieutenant Governor, I was very proud of the tax cuts and the job creation that was the focus of our administration. I think the foundation that we laid has helped to keep Florida growing and prosperous, and what you see today was based on the hard work and tough decisions that were made back when we were in office. I mean, my last couple years in the legislature were during the Great Recession, where we had to cut billions and billions and billions of dollars out of the state budget, and those are not easy decisions to make. We had gone well beyond cutting the fat, low-hanging fruit in the budget. We were down into bone, and it was very tough. It was not easy. There was a lot of people who were unhappy, and we were criticized a lot. But You look at some of the other states that took the easy route and raised taxes to make up the shortfalls, and they're worse off today than Florida is. So it's important to make the tough decisions, and be able to ignore the criticism when you know what you're doing is right.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Lieutenant, I want to scale it back a little bit, peel back the layers on the onion. You mentioned before, right now about your family, right, and how that, for so many, and I think for all of us, once we get to a certain point, we realize that that's the purpose in which we live our lives. And I think from an outsider looking in, it might be easy for someone to look at a person like you. Wow, like, this guy's a leader. He's hit all these milestones in his life. He has all these titles, all these accomplishments, and that's it, right? They might not look at what has shaped you, what has molded you, who are the kids that, because I mean, I'm not a parent yet. I hope to be one day, but I can't imagine the impact that not only you will leave on your kids, but what the impact that your kids have left on you and the relationship you have with your wife and your family. I think, can you talk about that a little bit? I want to get a little bit deeper in that, because I feel like a lot of our listeners, again, maybe ages, 21, 25, maybe getting into the family aspect. Right now, they're worried about grinding. They're worried about, really building a career for themselves. But how important is it for us to, take a step back and realize it, and maybe, not take that extra meeting and go home for dinner and sit with our kids for a nighttime dinner. Just talk a little bit about that, because I feel like that's not talked about enough. And I feel like we should definitely be putting more of a spotlight on that. And I think you're a great example of it.
Well, that's a good point. I spent most of my career in public service traveling. I got married the first year that I was in any public office, when I was elected in 2004. My first legislative session was in 2005, and our wedding was 2 weeks before my first legislative session. So for the first 8 years of my marriage, I was traveling during the Tallahassee legislative weeks that I needed to be there. So our first daughter was born while I was in the legislature in 2007. So her first 5 years of life, Poppy would just go to this magical place called Tallahassee several weeks out of the year, and he'd be gone. And that was just at the inception of like video conferencing, being easy to video conference on your phone. So for the first couple years of her life, she was just hearing a lot of the time of the year, she'd just hear my voice on a speakerphone. And it was tough because you miss things. You miss first tooth falling out, or you miss a recital or an event at school or an honor roll presentation, and it's difficult. And the kids remember that. And those memories are very very present in their consciousness. And it's important to remember that one's, at least from my perspective, I can't speak for others, but my perspective, one's primary responsibility is to their family. So that was a weight on my shoulders. The things that were missed. My second daughter was born while I was property appraiser, and I was home, so I wasn't traveling. But I only had that job for a year, and then I became lieutenant governor, and then I was back on the road. And actually, as lieutenant governor, I traveled even more than I did as a legislator, because if you think about it, a legislator's district, when you're not in Tallahassee, you're home in your district, and your district is not, at least in Dade County, the districts aren't very geographically large. Whereas in a statewide office, the state of Florida is your district. And it's not just about going to Tallahassee and doing the work there. You have to travel around your district. So that meant I traveled around Florida. So even though maybe the legislature wasn't convening for committee weeks or session, I was still traveling to other parts of the state, whether it be Pensacola, Panama City, Jacksonville, Lake City, Gainesville, Orlando, Tampa, Naples, Fort Myers, Broward, Palm Beach. It was the Keys. I traveled the whole state. There was one year that we put 250,000 miles on a car in one.
Wow.
That's how much we traveled around the state. So, so to your original question, it's important to put the priority, make sure your priorities are straight, and recognize that there are sacrifices that are made in public service, personal sacrifices. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're gonna, we're perfect segue into my next question of what you think makes a leader great. Because that's what we're after. This podcast is about finding out the secret to success, if you will. And we understand there's no secret, right? But we want to tap into these people's minds that are so successful like yourself and find out how'd you do it. What's your, because your story, you're a Miami kid. You went to Miami-Dade College, UM, like many of us. And we see a lot of ourselves in you and these people and these guests that we have onto the podcast. So the question is, based on your many different years and experiences as a leader in different capacities, what do you believe is the most important trait that makes a leader great?
That's a good question. It's not a simple answer, but if I was trying to find a simple answer, it'd be go when it's time to go. Move when it's time to move. Take action when it's time to take the action. Don't hesitate. Don't wait for others. Don't be a follower. I mean, a leader is, by definition, is the first to move. So that's important, is to not hesitate and go when you have to go. You have to be able to ignore criticism. You have to be able to, you have to have thick skin, because the more and more successful one gets, the more and more individuals may have envy, and envy sometimes turns into hate. So people may be trying to tear you down. So you got to be able to have thick skin and continue to do the right thing. Another trait of a good leader is having a good ethical compass. There are a lot of how would you say it? There are a lot of temptations when you have power, and a good leader knows how to resist temptation. You don't court temptation; it's just sometimes it's there, and there are those who have given in to those temptations, and I think they paid the price for it. So having a good ethical compass and staying honest to yourself and to your constituents is important. And then another thing that's, I think, important, not necessarily about a leader, but any person in a public service position, is never make a promise you can't keep. That was something my grandfather taught me. He said, never make a promise you can't keep. And I always made that very important in my career. And I never would. The only promise, and I would say this on the campaign trail when I was knocking on doors, I would say the only promise that I will make to you is I'm going to work as hard as I can. Because that's the only promise as an elected official that you really can make. Because especially in the legislative process, where you got to deal with, in the House, 119 other individuals and a Senate across the hall with 40 individuals, you can't promise any type of outcome that is contingent on all those other individuals being on board. So, but you can promise that you're going to work very hard, because that you do control. So don't overpromise, and only promise what you can actually deliver.
Lieutenant, I think, Anthony and I like to say something. You kind of touched on it now, about, go when you have to go, right? And I think that's such an important lesson for so many people, is because we like to say that leaders go first. And you also touched on that as well. And as a leader, your job, whatever position you hold, and I feel like you hold a few different leadership positions, as Anthony mentioned, your job is to guide and to set and cast a vision for this organization that you're a part of, but it's also to serve the people underneath you, your constituents, your community, your colleagues, the people that are underneath you and alongside you. I think that's, and even above you. Yeah, exactly. They are the ones that you're doing this for.
Yeah, they're your boss.
Exactly. So I feel like that's such an important concept for people to grasp. And I think, especially in today's age, how, we're in this, hustle culture, this CEO culture, if you will, where everyone wants the titles, everyone wants, the power, like you mentioned, but they might not have the capabilities to maybe grasp onto some of those leadership roles and some of those positions. Talk a little bit about that, and maybe some of the struggles that you had as a leader, how you've been able to overcome them in different capacities that you've held those leadership positions. Because I'm a firm believer that you are only given what you can take, right? And I think, certain times people are given too much responsibility, and they fail, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's maybe a lesson to learn. But talk to a little bit about maybe some of your failures, some of your struggles that you've experienced over your years, and how you've been able to grow, and learn from those experiences.
Well, my biggest, at least in my public service career, the biggest well, adversity that I faced was I lost my first election. In 2002, I ran for the Florida House, and it was Republican primary. It was not a competitive seat, so it was really decided in the primary. And my opponent was a sitting mayor of a city that was inside the district. So he had a leg up. He had some name recognition. I had not. I was starting from zero, and I resisted the calls for me to move and run in a different district. There were a lot of people who were trying to convince me to run. This district I ran for was more centralized in the county, and there were a lot of people putting pressure on me to a district that was very far west, like the westernmost district in Miami-Dade County, which was an area that I was not familiar with. I grew up in the district I ran in. I was not really very familiar with the district that I was being pushed and pressured to move to. So I put my head down and I worked my tail off. I knocked on probably 12,000 doors. I would every day from 10 a.m. until sundown. Except on Sundays, I would be knocking on doors. Sundays, I'd start at 1 p.m. and then go till sundown. And I did that from April until the election day in late August. And I probably lost 20 pounds. It was not easy. It was, walking door to door in Dade County in August is not easy. It's hot.
Yeah.
I would welcome rain, because it wouldn't be so hot. But I'd still knock on doors. I would, whenever it would rain, I had a separate list of voters that were strictly apartment buildings. So when it rained, I would pivot to the apartment buildings because obviously there's more cover there. And I worked my tail off. There were at the time, there were important leaders in this community who were telling me, look, the best case scenario is you can hope to lose 60-40. That's the best case scenario. And I lost, but I lost 51-49. It was a tight race. It was a close race. And it was tough. I mean, I put everything, and I mean everything into that election, including every penny that I had. And when I lost, I was dead broke, and I really didn't know where to go from there. I was expecting that my trajectory was I was going to win that race. So, but God had a different plan. And in retrospect, it was the best thing that could have happened to me in my life. And I've told that to every candidate that I've had interaction with that has lost an election. I tell them that story. That my loss was the best thing that could have happened, because in the interim between those two elections, 2002 to 2004, I met my wife, and the timing of 2004, being a freshman in 2004 versus 2002, the day delegation freshman class was only two people, myself and Anita de Flores. And by the time I was a senior, she had already moved on to the Senate, so I was the only delegation member of my class, which opened up the opportunity for leadership position. It was easier to get into leadership because there were no other mouths to feed from this community. So I believe that put me on a path to leadership. I was majority leader of the state house in my last 2 years. And I don't know if I had ended my time in the house in 2010 rather than 2012, if I'd have run for property appraiser in 2012, which then put me on the radar for being selected as lieutenant governor, having been a Republican Hispanic from Dade County who'd won a countywide election in the largest county in the largest state in the country. I think that was definitely something that put me on the radar of Red Scott and his administration for when he had to fill the vacancy for lieutenant governor. If I had just been a former state house member, I don't know if if I would have had that opportunity. I could have, but it all worked out the way it did for a reason. So, though at the time of an adversity, it may seem like it's the worst possible thing in the history of your life, it actually turned out to be the best. So you got to just continue to put one step in front of the other. And that's a very simple philosophy that I've had in everything that I do. Just keep on taking the steps forward. I've also reminded myself many times that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Taking those steps forward is important.
It's an incredible story, and actually, I know a little bit of what you're talking about and how you must have felt at that moment when you lost that first election, because over this past summer, I helped campaign for Robert Alonzo, who's a school board member now. Luckily, he won in his election, right? But I remember I was with him from the very beginning, early in the summer, and knocking on doors. And I might add, I knocked on doors in Hialeah, which I think is a bonus knocking on doors kind of point, because if you can knock doors in Hialeah like I do, you can knock anywhere, because Hialeah is a special place. But nonetheless, I get where you're saying.
My house district that I actually got elected to, Hialeah, East Hialeah, all of East Hialeah.
Oh yeah,
district. So I've knocked on many doors.
So you're a veteran of knocking on doors. I remember I was knocking on doors one day in Hialeah, and I just see a whole school bus in somebody's backyard, and it's just like you see the wildest things down in Hialeah. People invite you for coffee. It's a whole experience. So, but nonetheless, leading up to Robert's election day, I was looking at all the hard work we did, all the money we've put in, all the effort that the candidate, his team, myself have put into this race, and I couldn't imagine what it would feel like to lose. And you just pack up and go home. Like, there's no second place. It's done. All in one day, one decision, one day, it's all done. And I couldn't imagine what that would be like. So, having, experienced the campaign trail a little bit, just a small glimpse that you've gotten, and you having lost, but still that pushing you to be successful and to be who you are today, is an incredible story. And that mindset is so admired, because a lot of people, I think, would have lost and would have, lost motivation, this is not for me, and then just move on. So I admire your will and your strong mindset to continue going, and look at the results, right? You've done so much good for this state because you made a decision to continue and keep moving forward. So it's a remarkable story. And to kind of wrap up here, Lieutenant Governor, one of these, last question that I have for you, I don't know if Gabe might have another one, but one of the ones that I really wanted to ask you is, Gabe and I were talking about it before we logged on, is you're still so young, right? You're still such a young person. When we saw that you were in politics a couple years ago at your age, it was really remarkable, because we don't see that very often, young leaders in politics. Something that I really appreciate and admire, and someone who's interested in politics myself, seeing young people is really inspirational. So the question is, what's next for your personal and professional career now that you're kind of stepped away from the political arena?
Well, I returned to real estate development, and that's what I've been focused on for the last several years. Building warehouses in Jacksonville, Florida, is what I've been focused on, and it has its own type of stress, and has its own difficulties. But at least every time you do something, it's not put all over the internet.
There you go.
You don't have to deal with your contractor, your architect, your engineer, and your investors.
Are you thinking of maybe getting into politics later on? Possibly.
I'll never say never, but I don't have any concrete plans right now. Right now, I'm focused on what I'm doing, making up for some lost time. I mean, that is one of the sacrifices one makes as a public servant. Is it doesn't pay very well. You're not doing it for the money. You're doing it for the satisfaction of doing good for others, and that is rewarding in its own way. But book bags cost money. Eggs cost money. Gas costs money, and so I've been trying to make up for some lost time on that front.
Yeah, and actually, I do want to ask you one more question, and and this is for my political friends who are listening right now who are interested in politics. A lot of us, unfortunately, are discouraged to go into politics. And I say it's very unfortunate because I know a lot of great young people who I think would be phenomenal public servants, but they see what they see, which we all see on media, on the news networks, and a lot of not favorable things of certain politicians that I feel gets highlighted. So I'm not saying it's all of them. I definitely feel like the small majority are the ones that everybody sees, and that small majority is discouraging a lot of young, really good people who I think would be phenomenal. So the question is, what can you say to that aspect? What should we feel as young people who are getting discouraged to go into politics because of certain people that we see doing the wrong thing in politics?
Well, put it this way: there's 535 members of Congress. That's the U.S. Senate. You probably see the press and media focus on a dozen of them, or 15 of them to make the math easier. But that means that there's still 420 others that are not the focus of the media. And the media focuses on controversy and embarrassing things because that's what drives attention, unfortunately, in our society. But those 420 other individuals are probably doing good things for their constituents in this country. And I just use Congress as an example because it's easier for the description. But one piece of advice that I've always given people your age who are interested in politics and public service and maybe running for office one day is get your career in order first. And when I say that, what I mean is the career that pays the bills. Don't run for office thinking that is going to solve your income problem or be the solution to increasing your income or having a steady job. Most of the time, elected office doesn't pay enough to have to pay. I mean, the most basic necessities. For instance, a legislator only makes like $20,000-$30,000 a year. That's not enough money to live on, especially in South Florida. So have your income, your career that really pays your bills, have that steady and set before running for office. Because if you don't have to worry about money and how much you're making while you're in office, it frees you up to do good things.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, especially for young people that are looking to get into the public service. And I want to touch on something that you mentioned before. And like you mentioned now, you're not really focused on too much of what's happening next. You're kind of just present right now, and I think that's so refreshing to hear. I was actually talking to a good friend yesterday, and a much older gentleman than myself, and we were kind of joking about like the question that we always used to get in grade school is like, oh, what do you want to do when you grow up, right? And it's something that I still ask myself, and people still ask us all the time. And it's like, I mean, I want to do what I'm doing right now, but maybe in 10, 15 years, I could be in a completely different career path. And I think that's so true even for yourself as you approach your 50th birthday. I think there's so much life ahead of you that you continue to choose and do all these great things. And I think that's definitely something that I feel like COVID might have showed us, with people just completely changing career paths and really taking a risk. And I think that's also a lesson for all of us to learn from, to just not.
When I started in the state house, I had a goal. I wanted to go to Congress. I wanted to be a member of Congress. And towards the end of my career in elected life, I had the opportunity. I was heavily courted by the powers that be in D.C. to run for a congressional seat, but I didn't want to do it. And I didn't do it because I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be a member of Congress. It did not appeal to me. My outlook and my view of life had changed. A big part of that was becoming a father. When I started, I wasn't a father. And towards the end, I was the father of two girls. And the prospect of being a member of Congress and being away from home, basically every Monday through Thursday for 9 months out of the year, was not appealing. So in that regard, my outlook and my goal set changed, and my priorities changed. So that it and that's not a bad thing. That's just a natural evolution of maturing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all on this journey of life, and we're kind of figuring it out as we go. And people. Someone mentioned it yesterday, that one of our guests, that people come into your life for different reasons and seasons, and everybody plays a pivotal role in your development. And look, we just got to go with it, right? I like to use the analogy of, my mindset is just jump into the pool and I'll figure out how to swim later. Like, we'll just kind of figure it out, but strategically, right? We don't want to make silly mistakes. But Lieutenant Governor, I do want to ask you a question. What, knowing Florida so well, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges facing Florida right now? And then the second part of that question is, what's your favorite thing about Florida? We'll start with the challenging first. What do you think is the most challenging thing right now? Just in general, doesn't have to be anything specific. And then your favorite thing about Florida.
Well, I think infrastructure is going to be the most challenging thing for Florida, because of, we have 1,000 people moving to Florida every day, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But the more and more people that come here, the more pressure and stress on our infrastructure system occurs. Like, for instance, in South Florida, there was poor planning in the 60s and 70s as far as right-of-way and roads and transportation. And now our right-of-way and infrastructure system and roadway system is locked in. Unless you knock down buildings and knock down homes to widen roads, it is what it is. But you have still more and more people coming here, and there's more and more traffic. And that, to a lesser extent or a different extent, is happening in other communities in the state. It's a good problem to have, and luckily, our state is doing very well economically, from a revenue perspective in government. That I think that the revenue puzzle piece is not hard to solve. It's just the planning of how to spend that infrastructure revenue. So I think that's going to be one issue that is going to need to be addressed, and it's not a quick type of issue that you can handle in 1 day, 1 month, 1 year. It's a multi-year issue, and then more in the short term, property insurance rates are going to be an issue, going to continue to be a problem. But they're not problems that can't be solved as long as you have the right people making the decisions. And there was a second part of your question. Can you repeat?
Yeah, the second part was, what's your favorite thing about Florida?
I never thought about answering that one. I guess I'd have to say Miami. Yeah, and it's home, and it's so unique. Miami is probably one of the most unique communities in the entire country, because we have a little bit of everything here, and it's a very special place.
Man. Yeah. For us that get to call Miami home, it's definitely an honor and a privilege, and I'm so prideful and proud to be part of a city that has grown so much and it's continued to evolve over the last few years, and it's just the future is bright. And I have so many buddies from out of state, from Chicago, from New York, and that are coming here, and they always talk, hey man, I love Miami. I love how all the food, all the people. And I definitely think Miami is a special place, and it's almost like its own place compared to all the other little cities and towns in Florida, which is always so interesting. But that's all we got for you, Lieutenant Governor. Thank you so much. I feel like this was a super informative and very wisdom-packed episode. I know for myself, and I can't wait for our listeners to hear this conversation. And again, we appreciate all the experiences that you've been able to share with us, all of your wisdom, your knowledge. For all of your years of experience, and we can't wait to see what's next for you. I know this is, just the beginning. Like we mentioned, you have so much life ahead of you, so much work ahead of you, and we appreciate all that you're doing for our great state of Florida. So thank you again. You're now part of the Mindset family, and we're excited for you. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Anthony and Gabriel. Appreciate the opportunity.